Okay, can you all see my screen now?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
Sorry, we've got some more that I need to admit. Another 3. That's great.
25. So welcome everybody. My name is Liz Stuffins and I work for Walsall Council, you can see from my background, in the Healthy Spaces team. So the Healthy Spaces team is a combined unit of sports development and green spaces development people with a healthy input from public health. So yeah, Alison sorted out a really good programme today. So first of all, we're looking at making space for girls. Susanna Walker and Imogen Clark are going to talk to us about their work. Then we've got a presentation from the Open Spaces Society. That's a pre-recorded presentation. Then we've got Ruth Burgess talking to us about the West Midlands Combined Authority Green Grant. So apologies to the East Midlands people. This is a bit of a West Midlands focused bit of work. And also the police, the West Midlands Police are going to talk to us about their work with some funding that they've got for the West Midlands area. And not that we normally do this, but we thought we would do a bit of a roundtable discussion at the end, which is something that we used to do a lot in the West Midlands, which is just hearing a little bit about what's happening in your particular authority, what the sort of key things you're working on at the moment. Just one per authority is sufficient. You know, some big meaty projects that you're working on that you're really pleased about. In the past, we have sometimes had a bit of a moaning session, which has helped with our own mental health when things are getting us down. But I think we'll try and keep it upbeat today. So just a short little piece at the end, so give you a bit of time to think about the one big project that you're working on that you want to shout about and tell the rest of the forum about. So I'll hand over to you then, Susanna, and missed the other name, sorry.
Imogen. Hello.
Imogen. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much to everybody for making time for us to come and talk to you today. That's a little quote from Lily, who's 14, when we asked her, what do you like doing when you go to the park? And that was her answer. Why would I go to the park? There's nothing there for me, which we thought was rather sad. Next slide, please.
Ooh. Sorry, that's just coming. There we go. I think my Wi-Fi is a bit slow.
Thank you. This is a little bit about who we are, Make Space for Girls. We're a charity and we're trying to make parks and similar spaces work better for teenage girls. And so we really want the people who create these parks to understand what teenage girls would like, to respect the knowledge that teenage girls have of their local areas, because it's a really in-depth knowledge of what goes on and where in their local area, because unlike adults, teenagers have a lot of headspace for really understanding the micro areas where they live and where they hang out. So we'd like people to tap into that knowledge, and we'd like people to include facilities in parks that really make teenage girls feel welcome in those parks. Next slide, please. This is our dream. This is what we'd love parks to look like. Parks where girls can exercise if they want to. It can be formal exercise like running or playing football. It can be in more informal, fun, skating. It can even just be lounging around. But we really want parks and similar spaces where girls feel comfortable. But if I just go on to our next slide, and this is more like the reality. I talked about parks being places where girls felt comfortable, and there's just some recent data, some work done in Glasgow about parks and public transport. Only 20% of girls who are actually using a park felt very comfortable in the park that they had chosen to use. So this isn't 20% of all girls, this is 20% of girls who are choosing to use parks. And presumably they're choosing to use the park that feels best for them. But it's still only 20% feeling very comfortable there. Another sort of response around feeling comfortable in parks, that was Roundtree Park in York, talking to 10 to 17-year-old girls this summer, the one that's just been. 90% of the girls who were into skating said they didn't feel comfortable in the skate park, which is such a shame because, you know, they've provided a skate park, a facility that they want everybody to use. But 90% of the girls who are into skating, they don't feel comfortable in the skate park. And then Nature England, their Child and Young People and Nature survey in 2021, when asking young people what stopped them spending more time outside in the last week, girls were almost twice as likely as boys to say this: other people make me feel uncomfortable. So there's something going on at the moment, which means teenage girls are not feeling comfortable in our green spaces. Next slide, please. This is the problem we seem to have. When facilities are built for teenagers, they tend to consist of skate parks, multi-use games areas, fenced pitches, and BMX tracks. And all of these just tend to be dominated by boys. And if we want teenage girls to be active, which we do, we need to start thinking about places that they are welcome to be active in. And what we want to try and do is solve this by trying to change the designs that we put into places like parks. Not so much about trying to change the girls so that they fit into the designs that we already have. Next slide, please. An important part, and one of the reasons that we're called Make Space for Girls, is because the public sector equality duty, which I'm sure a lot of you are very familiar with, is a really positive bit of equality legislation. Too much of our equality legislation in the UK, it's all negative. It's don't do this, don't do that. You know, it's a very negative set of legal principles, but actually the public sector equality duty breaks that mould. It's a very positive duty. And what it's saying is that public authorities, when they're making decisions, need to have due regard to the need to various positive things, including the need to advance equality of opportunity between advantaged and disadvantaged groups. And when we try and apply that to a park setting, what we see is that multi-use games areas, skate parks, BMX tracks, all those spaces are being used and being dominated by boys. The boys are very much the advantaged group here. And so what public authorities need to think about is, well, how can we advance that equality of opportunity for the disadvantaged group, the girls? And again, of course, as you all know, the public sector equality duty doesn't dictate an outcome, but it should be a really proactive, it should be more than a process. It's proactive thinking through of your decisions in a way to create more equal outcomes. So very passionate about the public sector equality duty. It's a really positive tool to be used. Next slide, please. Just a little bit of data about health and activity. I won't read through these slides. This is from a fairly recent piece of data. It was produced by Steer Education, and the pandemic has had a very negative effect on the mental health of teenage girls. And we know that being outdoors and being in green space can actually have a positive impact on people's mental health. So it's really important that we embrace the ability of parks to make that very positive contribution to what is a very real and growing problem in terms of teenage girl mental health. Next slide, please. What do girls say about activity? And I'm going to sort of hand over to Susanna after this. What do girls say about activity? This is from Women in Sport, and they sort of had some really positive stats. This is talking to teenage girls during the pandemic, and 83% of them said they were going to put more effort into being fit and active after the pandemic, which I think is an incredibly positive statistic. And if we can all be part of the movement that when they are putting more effort into being fit and active, we are all part of a movement that's providing space, outdoor space that is welcoming to them to do that in. Because we can see what they also said about how these things made them feel. Being physically active made them happier. Being physically active made them feel less stressed. So this is what girls are talking about. If I could just go on to the next slide and then pass on to Susanna, I think. Oh no, I'll do sports versus play, apologies. When we talk about activity, a lot of people default into thinking about, let's put on a football shirt, let's put on a running vest, let's do sport. And sport is fantastic, and some girls love sport. It gives them a huge amount. But there are girls who are non-sporty. They either badge themselves as non-sporty, or sometimes they're badged by other people as non-sporty. And Women in Sport have done some great research about what non-sporty girls think about sport. And they say that they find it judgmental and rule driven, they find it stressful, and they say it feels like another way to fail. So sport can be fantastic for some girls, but not for all girls. And we don't want to be pushing teenage girls into a framework where they're feeling, oh, I'm just being set up to fail again. So at Make Space for Girls, we're about play being self-directed, being social, free. And often for teenagers, play will look a lot like loitering, hanging about, horseplay, mucking about. It doesn't look like younger kids play, but it's still very important because play will lead to increased activity levels. And I will now pass on to Susanna. Next slide.
Thank you. So, oh, I've got a bit of a weird echo. I hope that's all right. What do teenagers say about what they want? They want a space that is theirs. This comes from some research in Brent, where a researcher from the LSE worked with a small group of teenagers, not just girls, but a mixed group. But interestingly, what they said they wanted was not what they all tend to get. They want spaces that feel theirs. And that's related to the idea about being kids without little kids being there. Because they want something that says it's okay to be a teenager here, where they can play, where they're not being disapproved of for being on the little kids equipment. And so often you get the signs that just say no children over 12 on this space, and there's nothing provided for the for them to go to. So they have no choice. They either go on the stuff or they just don't do anything at all. And it's worth noting in this context that under the UN Rights of the Child, children go up to the age of 18, so teenagers very much have a right to play, and it's something that tends to get forgotten in the provision of facilities. Now, to be hidden but seen, this may sound like it doesn't make sense, but teenagers actually want to be in a place with other people, particularly girls, because that makes them feel safer. So they want to be in but they don't want to be seen by people they know. So they don't want to see their teachers, they don't want to see their parents, they don't want to see their parents' friends. So quite often they will park themselves by areas of high foot traffic where they feel safe, but where they're partly hidden. The classic example of this is we know of in a park in London, where for several years worth of teenagers, the meeting point has been a tree with branches that goes down almost down to park level, but it's right on a crossroads, and all the girls meet there because they feel safe, but they're also invisible. They're seen and not seen. And a key thing, again, that works particularly for teenage girls is many areas, because if you create one big space, then only one group can use it. And the obvious example of that is the football pitch. That's just one space that can only be taken up by one group. The more you break a space up into different places, the more groups can use it and the less that one group can dominate it. And it can be really simple, like not just having one team shelter, but putting different seating areas in different places so that people have a choice about where to go and things can't be territorialized. So that's really crucial. Next slide, please. How do we engage with teenage girls? This is a really important question, because although we can give you guidance, it's really important that we talk to teenage girls about what they want, because they are not one massive block. Where the area where they live makes a huge difference to how they're at, whether it's urban, whether it's rural. Sometimes in rural areas, actually, girls may not feel the need to have as many facilities provided because they've got so many other places to go. But also, just on a really basic level, we're often asked, so who are the, how do you define a teenager? And our answer is we deal with girls from the age when they start going to the park on their own, because parents are great enforcers of equity and safety and general well-being. But so it's the point at which they stop going with their parents, and that varies hugely. In London it can be 12, 13. Where I live in a relatively small town in Somerset, it's 9. So what people need, what girls need, really varies. And obviously ethnic groupings and religion can also play a huge part in that. That's a comment from a piece of work that was done in East London, where girls found it very hard to be out on the streets because the perception in some cultures was that unless you were carrying a shopping bag, you were a hoe if you were out walking out in public space, which is enormously problematic, but that's the kind of thing that has to be considered. And we need to go and find the teenage girls, because one of the problems with park consultations is they tend to consult the users of the park. And if teenage girls aren't using the park, they'll just end up in a sort of self-referential circle where they never get asked, so they never go there because there's nothing there for them. So just asking in the park isn't enough. And we need to talk to girls on their own as well, because they're in a difficult position with teenage boys. They simultaneously, they are their classmates, they are their friends, they're potentially their boyfriends. They're also potentially the group of boys who are shouting things at them when they walk past. So only by asking them on their own, as well as with the boys, can you really find out what the issues are for them. And again, this is related, the trap of only listening to the users. This happens a lot with skate parks, where this is actually the guidance from Skateboard GB, where they say, design your skate park by talking to the users. But by definition, just to put this really simply, if you talk to the users, none of them are going to say they need a beginner's ramp because they can all skateboard. So you will get a skate park that's designed only for the most experienced and which doesn't invite anybody else in. And if the girls don't feel that they can go on the skate park for a whole lot of reasons, which they don't, then they will never get a skate park that's designed to include them. Co-production is a really important part of that, and we're very happy to talk about that in more detail if people want to come and talk to us afterwards. And what we're looking for is parks where teenage girls have the potential to make positive, meaningful choices about what they do from a range of options. Next slide, please. Now, this is the good news bit, that we're not just sailing out into the darkness going, I wonder what this would be. There's been some great work done in Europe, consulting with teenage girls, building facilities that work for them, particularly in Sweden and Vienna. And from this, we can take some reasonably common themes. Safety is a key factor. The safer a park feels, the more teenage girls are likely to use it. So lighting is really important, not just the fact of being lighting, but it not pooling, creating darker spaces which actually feel more dangerous. Circular paths around the perimeter, no dead end paths, being able to see where you're going and having a choice of routes. So that if something looks dodgy ahead, you can get out of the way. And again, so much of this, it doesn't just benefit teenage girls. You know, safer parks work for older people. Some of the things about not territorializing areas actually work for other boys as well. But a lot of facilities tend to get used by quite a small group of teenagers, and we're quite often told about boys who don't feel they can use the Muga, don't feel they can use the skate park. So dividing things up again helps for a whole lot of people. Social seating. Teenage girls really want to face each other when they talk, and park benches are so often straight, which, as was brilliantly expressed by one teenager, they said, which means one of us always has to get a gravelly bum. So curved seating is really just so important to them. And swings, gym bars and hammocks. Now, swings and gym bars used to be in parks, but they've somehow got designed out, and the swings have got smaller and got fenced into the toddler area so that girls feel that if they go on them, they'll be disapproved of, which is a real problem for them. So bigger swings, gym bars that are not designed for pull-ups, but that are just like gymnastics bars, they are really important to them. Performance spaces, simple stages, which can also be used by the community to do your TikTok dancing, and good quality toilets, which again is something that just benefits everyone. Next slide, please. So this is Vienna. I'm going to rush through these quite quickly, but we can talk about them more if people want to afterwards. This was the first time that anybody ever tried this, and they realised that the girls were just walking through the park and not stopping. So they put in hammocks and little square structures, because what's also interesting about what we tend to provide for teenagers is it's quite didactic. Skate here, play football here, and actually playful spaces that can be interpreted in a number of ways are also really important. Next slide, please. Because the other thing they did was they broke up the Muga, which was being very dominated by boys. So what you can't see in this picture, because I can't get a decent picture of it anywhere, is that one of the walls has been taken back, because Mugas can feel very scary for teenage girls because they're fenced, they have narrow entrances, they're like boy cages. And so what they've done here is open it up. There's another entrance where that structure is, and they've divided this up with a structure that could be a seat, could be a stage, could be whatever you want it to be. And again, they've only put lines on one side of that divider. So again, there's a more open space inviting a lot of different kinds of play. Next slide, please. This is a stage in Vienna requested by local girls. It's actually in quite a major square in Vienna. So it's a community asset. It's used for all sorts of events. And then the teenage girls use it when there's nobody else doing it. Brilliant, simple, job done. Next slide, please. Malmo. Malmo's a really interesting case study because this was actually designed with a group of teenage girls and young women, and they put in exactly what they wanted. And they wanted a climbing wall, a stage again, gymnastics bars, and again for it to be broken up into smaller spaces. If you go to the next slide, you can see the picture. And this works brilliantly, but interestingly, this was done entirely to the designs of teenage girls. They reckoned that in the teenage parks before that, it had been 80% boys, 20% girls. Doing this design merely created it equal. So it was used 52% by boys and 48% by girls. So it takes a lot of effort to push that needle over towards greater equality. Next slide, please. I love this park. It's a relatively recent one in a suburb of Stockholm, and they've just taken the area of one Muga and created a playful space that was designed with teenage girls that doesn't tell you what to do. If we go to the next slide, I will just point out one particular thing that I love about this. It's got shelter rather than a shelter, because if you put a shelter, again, it becomes a territorializable space that only one group can use. Whereas if you include shelter in the body of the park, people can be active and play and be in shelter. And let's face it, the weather in Britain is not any better than the weather in Sweden. So why we don't sometimes think about things like this, I'm not sure. That, you know, actually allowing activity as well as shelter, I think is a really interesting way of thinking about it. And as you can see, it's not, there's a lot of just space to do things. I've seen pictures of girls cycling around the circles, and it's not as prescriptive and it feels much more welcoming. Next slide, please. Swings. These are, I mean, obviously these are the top end of anything that anybody might want, but we shared these on Twitter and there were so many adults just going, I don't care about teenage girls, give these to me. Enormous amounts of positivity, again, really safe, but also one of the important things I think particularly about swings, adult size swings, is that they act as a sign for teenage girls that they are welcome in the park. Because boys see a football pitch or a skate park and they go, okay, this is a place for us. There's nothing that tells teenage girls that they are welcome in public space. And in fact, the message they get from parks is go home, you should be at home. Next slide, please. So that's it. That's an absolute canter through. We'd be very happy to talk to anybody and everybody at greater length if you wanted to contact us afterwards. Thank you very much.
So have we got any questions? Put your hand up. Oh, a round of applause there. One of the things I wanted, oh, Dawn.
Only one question from me. Thank you for that presentation. That was really useful. Please, could we have the slide back up with the contact information for a little bit longer, please?
Yes, I'll put that up.
So will we get access to any of the information that was contained in there? Because as a parent to daughters and to sons, yes, I think it's incredibly important. And I think this is how we need to start addressing the future of our green spaces. So I thought that was excellent. Thank you ever so much.
I think Susanna has just put the link to our website into the chat, makespaceforgirls.co.uk. And I think, will the slides be made available generally?
Yes, all the slides and the recording will go onto the website within the next few days.
I'm just going to put a link in, which is a longer presentation that we did for the Australian Association of Landscape Architects, but it's still very much the same. But it's a fuller explanation of some of the issues if people really wanted to go into more depth. And there's also lots of information on our website. There's a research document and greater detail about the case studies as well.
We've also got sort of material to help, you know, if you're wanting to try and consult with girls, we've got sort of material to help with consultations and workshops and things. So we very much set our website up as a kind of a library, and we're trying to put as much useful information as we can for as many people just to go on and access it. So please do access it. And if you come across anything that you think, wow, that's a really good example of a space in a park that's working for girls, please let us know, because we just want to amplify, you know, the work that's out there that's doing good in this.
So that comes on to my question really, which was, you gave us lots of really great case studies from Europe, but have you come across anything at all in Britain at the moment that you think is really worthwhile looking at? No.
No. And there are a few little odds and bits here and there, and this is one of our aims, is to do, and we're working in Bath at the moment and with a couple of smaller parks to just try and tweak existing designs and see if we can get more girls in. So there's a very untouristy park in Bath that we're working with to put some facilities in and see if that affects how girls use it. There are some small things here and there, but there's nothing that's been designed specifically with girls in mind. And some of the stuff in the Olympic Park works, oddly, because the other answer to breaking spaces up is to build something so big that no one group can territorialise it. So the climbing wall in the Olympic Park is so big that anybody can use it all at the same time. And that seems to be working quite well for, you know, for attracting a much more equal sort of group of users. There's some small shelters in Spa Fields in Islington in London, which were designed with teenagers, and they were only ever meant to be a temporary thing, but they are spaces that can be shelters when it's raining, but you can also just climb on them. And they've been so successful, and interestingly also really well looked after by the teenagers because they were involved in the design and stuff, that they've survived 3 iterations of the 3 redesigns of the area around it. So there are little tiny bits, but no, I mean, there isn't that much in Europe, to be fair.
Yeah. Great. Any other questions? No, thank you. Okay, Alison.
Okay. Okay, you should be seeing now the Make Space for Girls contact.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So we'll now move on to the community green grants.
Great, thank you. Thanks for inviting me here today. I do apologise to the people in the East Midlands because this is West Midlands, and it is aimed at the 7 main local authorities as well, I'm afraid. So it is a limited audience, but I hope it's interesting anyway and useful. So yeah, just to give you a bit of background on the programme, so the Community Green Grants came out of a piece of research that the Combined Authority did with the New Economics Foundation about the negative impact of the lack of green space, which Imogen spoke about in her presentation. We all know that poor access to green space is really bad for people. It makes it harder for people to connect with nature and care about the environment. So the West Midlands Combined Authority have set about setting up a green grant, community green grant, to try and tackle some of these problems. So the aim of the fund is to increase and improve green spaces close to where people live, for example, within a 10-minute walk of where people live. We want to fund projects that connect people to nature, especially communities experience what we might call green deprivation, so neighbourhoods, and areas where maybe there's very little access to green or blue space, or not very good access to green or blue space. We want to fund projects that also enhance the local environment. So this fund is really about funding projects that increase access and increase biodiversity. We want those two things. So we want planting, we want clearing, we want habitat boxes, that kind of stuff. And we also want to fund projects that tackle barriers to accessing green space. So, you know, there might be a big green space close to where someone lives, or like an abandoned piece of space owned by a council that they might give a group permission to use, that maybe people don't use because it's not nice, or there's antisocial behaviour there, or it's not safe. So if people had a project in mind that could tackle some of those barriers and open up a space for people to use, would be interested in that. For the fund, we want to fund community-based organisations that can work alongside people. We call it a green grant, but we're also interested in funding projects near blue spaces, so canals and riversides, and grey spaces. So we're very interested in kind of what they call urban greening. And we want to fund projects that benefit the environment and enhance people's lives. And we want to fund projects that empower communities to manage and improve their own local green spaces. So as the slide says, we have about 700,000 to give away across the 7 main areas of the combined authority. And we're very happy to be working with Heart of England Community Foundation in administering the fund. And I will give you the link later for the website where our application is with Heart. So I'm just going to go through the different types of grants. So if I could have the next slide. So we have 2 different types of grant as part of the fund. And the first grant is what we're calling our small grants, which is 3,000 to 25,000. So this is really the main thrust of the fund that we have. The majority of the funds that we'll be giving out will be the small grants. These are aimed at charities, CICs, community groups who are embedded in the community and work successfully alongside people to get them accessing a green space. So I've included in this slide some kind of examples of projects that people could do. These are really just examples. We are really open to your ideas, what's appropriate for your community, what's needed in your area, but some, you know, projects that people come up with are things like pocket parks or gardening projects or a pollinator project. So whatever it is that would get people accessing a green space and also improve the biodiversity of the area. And as you can see in this little picture, this is a great example of using a kind of grey space. It's kind of it's an unused church yard that a community group took over, and they've dug up the slabs. They've planted some trees, and they've also put in some raised beds, and they ran a nature play group with local children who mainly live in flats and don't have access to gardens, and also a lot of them were lockdown babies, so really hadn't had much of a chance to access nature. So they ran a nature play group where the children could touch the earth, learn about planting, and it's just a small space but made a big difference to people. So there's some of the kind of inventive ideas you can do. If I could have the next slide. So we also have some large grants. We have very limited large grants. People find these very attractive, which I really understand, but you really do have to have quite a large scale plan, and that is significantly going to increase the biodiversity of the area. So we're thinking quite significant habitat creation, we're thinking very significant access, perhaps concentrating in bringing a particular plant life back or regenerating, you know, a river with bad pollution. So we would expect quite an ambitious plan, but we wanted to have a large grant as well because we just recognise there will be some groups in the West Midlands area that do have access to bigger space and can do something more ambitious. So if you are interested in large grants, I would say please have a conversation with me first. I mean, generally, please contact me anyway before you put in an application, because if possible, I like to come out and visit people's sites so I can see what it is they want to do and really understand it. But yeah, those are the 2 different types of funds we have, the small grants and the large grants. If you could go into the next slide. So the grant model that we have is called a rolling grant. So we're open for 2 years and we're kind of committed to giving away money over that period of time. We will give away a certain amount each quarter. So we don't want people to rush to get their applications in because, you know, you don't have to get it in now. We're not going to give it all straight away. We're going to try and stagger it over the grant time. The applications for the financial awards are managed by Heart of England Community Foundation. They assess the eligibility of the applications, and then the applications go to the combined authority, and then the grant approval panel makes the final decision who gets funded. And that grant approval panel is made up of people from Heart Community Foundation, staff from the combined authority, and then also some external staff. For example, we have a lady from Wolverhampton University who's an ecologist, so we have people who really know their stuff in terms of what will work for planting and what will work for different areas. Go to the next slide. So this fund is really aimed at community and voluntary sector groups, charities and not-for-profit organisations as provable charitable aims. So organisations that apply must be based and deliver in the combined authority area. So that's Birmingham, Coventry, Dudley, Sandwell, Solihull, Walsall and Wolverhampton. And they do have to be based and deliver in because we do want to have that local, authentic way of delivering these projects. So we don't want people kind of parachuting in if they're outside organisations. You want people to know their communities and be embedded in those. So it will be based and deliver in those areas. Organisations need to have a management committee or board of trustees or board of directors. They need to have a bank account in the name of the organisation. And there are some policies and documents that have to be submitted, such as annual accounts or financial records if you don't have annual accounts, and then safeguarding policies if appropriate. And then also evidence of permission to use the land. So you might want to do a project on a piece of land that's yours, that belongs to your centre. You might be looking to get a piece of unused land from the council. So if that's your plan, you need to make sure you get that permission in place and have evidence of that permission when you apply. Applications from unconstituted groups are welcome if working in partnership. So we do recognise there might be some groups out there who are unconstituted, but what we'd encourage them to do is to work with a partnership organisation that fulfils the criteria. Okay, next slide. So what we will fund. So we just we're very much project focused with this fund. So as long as your kind of costs are justifiable and direct related to project activity, we're kind of open to funding them. But you just need to make sure you explain your costs and explain your budget in your project plan. Sometimes it can be really difficult for funders if they read a project plan which sounds absolutely lovely and makes sense, and then in the budget sometimes there's extra things kind of just stuck in, like, website development, for example, and I need to know, why is a website development needed to make this project work? So just make sure all your costs are justifiable and they relate directly to the outcomes of this project, which is all about accessing green space and increasing the biodiversity. So it really is the kind of practical work of what needs to be done to make those outcomes happen. So make sure all those costs are linked to that. So, thank you. So what we won't fund, so this is all pretty standard criteria. A few things to note is that we can't find projects that promote religious views or political views, but we're happy to fund faith groups that meet their previously discussed requirements, because most faith groups are also registered charities. Also, in terms of schools and colleges, if they have a setup like a Friends of group, that meets the requirement and land that's accessible to the public, there's a possibility of funding, but we don't generally fund schools and colleges because they're not open outside of those times. They're not open to other people except for those students. But I know there are some exceptions to that, so please do contact me if you want to discuss a project that's in a school or college. So next slide. So application criteria. So on the Heart website, there's the application that you can fill in. You can save it as you go, so it's really good in that way. You don't have to do it all at once. And there's also a document called the Fund Fact Sheet, which goes through all the questions and also gives guidance on what we're looking for and how to answer them. So please do make sure you read that thoroughly before applying. There's about 7 questions. They cover the project plan, so the details of what you'll be doing and the activities and aims of the project. Give us as much detail as you can and never assume you really know anything about your organisation or project. We want to know details like who you'll be working with, numbers, who will run the project and the staff and volunteers involved. Also, you need to include justification for the plan. So you need to show why the project is needed and how you've come about deciding to apply for this project. So have you spoken to local people about it? Do you have some volunteers ready to start? So let us know why it's needed. And then also an essential element is showing us how you're going to improve nature. So projects like walking in parks or cycling in parks are wonderful and good for health, but that's not quite what we want. So we need that access and we also need that increasing biodiversity. So you need to remember to include both those elements. We're not saying that everybody involved in your project has to be like digging or planting, but there needs to be some of those elements within it as well. If you move into the next slide. So the priorities. So our pot is quite limited and we think the grant will be quite popular. We haven't funded anything yet. We are just going through our first quarter at the moment and have received quite a few applications. So in terms of making decisions, we have a priority criteria that we use as part of the assessment if needed. So that's if the project is an area of deprivation according to indices of multiple deprivation. Also, if the project is significantly increasing green or blue spaces for a community that doesn't have much access to those spaces, and if the project is good value for money as well. We really are trying to seek to spread the fund equally as we can across the West Midlands area, but we wouldn't prioritise that over quality of application. Have the next slide. And this is where you can find us. So we have our page on the Heart of England Community Foundation website. I'll put a link in the chat as well. You can go on there, you can fill out the application, save it as you go, read the fund fact sheet. But yeah, my advice is please do just contact me for an informal chat about your project, because it's really good to chat through ideas, answer any questions you have, and then hopefully that will help you with filling out the application. Although a conversation with me never guarantees funding. Okay, I think that's everything for me, if that's all right.
Lovely, thank you, Ruth. Any questions for anybody? Raise your hand. Oh, Richard.
Yeah, I've been approached by a community organisation that want to improve lighting so that people can cross a site, but they want to increase it to feel safer to access the site and also improve planting. But the lighting they're putting in is a bat-sensitive lighting because they want to protect the bats that are already in the park. Is that something that would sort of sit quite nicely? Or I know it's lighting and access, but it's improving people accessing the site. But does that tick enough green boxes to warrant an application? I know I should read the rules, but and I will do so after this, but I just thought while I got you here I'd ask the question.
It's fine. Yeah, it's difficult to say really. I would say it would depend on like the cost of that lighting and how much it kind of adds to the kind of wider aims of the access and the biodiversity. So yeah, it would really depend on the context. I would say it's a trickier one to get funding for. We're asked a lot about that kind of thing and paths and fencing, and they're all possible if justifiable and good value for money. But yeah, it really depends what that will achieve, I guess. It's difficult because if that's then up against an application which is going to, you know, like plant an orchard or, you know, do you know what I mean?
Totally.
Biodiversity is a big factor. But yeah, it depends on the context, I think.
Okay, I'll follow that with an email, I think. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
So have we got anyone else on the call today that is eligible that is in the area? Sarah Royal, do you know of any groups in particular that are looking at this particular fund?
Well, I've definitely advertised it out to all our groups in our newsletter, and we do a lot of work with Get Grants with our groups as well. So Get Grants do know about this fund.
Yeah, they've been in touch.
That's good. That's good. So we've got, you see, a CCORN fund at the moment, which means a lot of our groups, we're paying for Get Grants' expertise, and so the groups can get it free. So I am hoping that through Get Grants that quite a number of the groups will be going to this, because I have told them all about it and sent out all the information to them.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, and Viv from Wally Woods has said she's eligible and she's going. So good
Oh,
on,
fabulous.
good on, Viv. So the end of this first quarter, when does that happen? And when are you sort of assigning this first tranche?
Yeah, so the panel meet at the end of each quarter, so they will be meeting soon, and then the end of next quarter will be June. So my kind of advice is probably, if you want to get it, if you're aiming for a particular quarter, I would get it in, you know, at the beginning of that month.
Yeah.
So the next end is June, and then it'll be September, then December. So if you want to be considered for the next quarter, I would say early June is the time to get it in.
It's useful, thank you. Okay. So do we want to try again with the Open Spaces Society?
I think we'll leave that for the link then. I'll send that round in the link rather than us have to
Okay.
try and tackle the
Yeah.
test. And, you know, while everyone's in the room, it's unfair to keep people waiting. So I was wondering, hopefully, if
Alison, I've put the instructions in the chat if you want to know how to put the video on.
okay.
The sound.
Thank you so much, Laura. I think because I'm going to have to close my screen down to get into the chat, it's just too tiresome for people to wait. So if it's okay, I'll get that round to everyone. It'll be up on our website within a couple of days, and then it's just a 10 minutes, and it's really interesting about that protection of land, something a little bit different to what Fields in Trust do. It's about encouraging people to register as village green and similar sort of things, and how they protect it. So yeah, I'll get that round to everyone. Liz, I'm hoping that we've got Erica Jarrett in the room now from West Midlands Police.
Are you there, Erica?
I
Yes,
am.
she is.
Right,
Erica.
welcome, Erica. Now, Erica, you've got your own slides now, I understand.
I have. Let me just get them loaded.
Fantastic. It's one of those days, isn't it now, going around the country with all these slides to share.
There it is. Got too many pages open at once. Can you see that?
Brilliant. Yeah, we can see it. Thank you, Erica.
So hello everyone, I'm Erica Jarrett and I am the Assistant Team Delivery Manager at the Violence Reduction Unit. So I know it did say on the schedule that we are the police. We're not, we are West Midlands Violence Reduction Unit. We work very, very closely with the police, but we do actually sit within the Crime Commissioner's office, and we are directly funded from the Home Office. So just to give people a bit more understanding about kind of who we're held accountable to more than anything. So I've got a brief presentation for you today. My boss, Nikki Penniston, was hoping to be here, but unfortunately she couldn't make it, so I'll be covering. So I've got a quick presentation which aims to really give you an understanding of who the VRU are, why we take a place-based approach to our work, how people can get involved with our stakeholder groups or within our place-based work, and then just to see how we can kind of work together more closely and how we can support this group. So I'll start with a bit of background. As you can see here, so in March 2019, the Home Secretary announced 100 million for the National Serious Violence Fund to tackle serious violence. We know that knife crime has been on the increase, also gun crime has also been on the increase in recent years. So knife crime has doubled since 2012 and gun crime has, oh, I've got me thing blocking my statistic, there we go. Gun crime has risen more than a third as well since that time. So obviously it's something the government are looking to try and tackle and take quite seriously.
Sorry,
So-
Erica, can you show it on slideshow so that the
Yeah.
size of the slides are slightly bigger?
Is that better?
If you click on slideshow where you're on the top
Yeah, did the little button with the start from beginning? No, that's the wrong one.
Yeah, that would do.
Yeah, that one.
Yeah.
Okay, let's press that one. So that made it bigger?
Not yet.
I had this problem the other day.
We are having problems with technology today.
No.
If you try the bottom right hand corner where the slideshow button is, does that change it at all?
Let's have a look. Get rid of that. Bottom right hand corner.
That one.
Yep. Does that work?
No.
It's showing big on my screen.
How peculiar.
Shall I try zoom in on it? Or that?
Yeah, that might work.
Is that any bit better?
Woo. Yeah, we can't see all the slide now.
Oh.
We'll have to make do.
All right, sorry about that. The same thing
Sorry.
happened to me the other day when I was presenting. I didn't have a clue. I pressed the button, but it just didn't work. So yeah, 63.4 million was allocated to police surge activity, including increased police patrols in 18 areas across the worst affected by serious violence. So 1.6 million was allocated to improving data to support the planning of operations around serious violence, and 35 million was invested in establishing 18 violence reduction units, all aimed at building capacity to tackle the root causes of violence. And our allocation out of that, so the West Midlands VRU received 3.37 million for the year 2020-2021. And 51% of that was spent on commissioned interventions. So anything from kind of mentoring within schools to more intensive lived experience mentoring for those worst affected by violence and are hardest to reach, so to speak, in our communities. Right up to kind of therapeutic work, counselling, various workshops, and really trying to create a strong counter narrative to violence. So, you know, giving young people an alternative to just it's bad, don't carry a knife, it's wrong. So we've got lots of different interventions that have been taking place across the Midlands. And I know there are various other violence reduction units around the country who we do work as closely in partnership as possible. So the remainder of the money was split across kind of core staffing and infrastructure, and then evaluation and operational costs. In terms of where we're at now, so we've been funded up to date year on year from the Home Office, which makes tackling violence quite difficult when you're only got an allocation for funding year on year. So our director is currently trying to work on a multi-year 3-year grant from the Home Office, which should enable us to get, you know, really embed ourselves into the local areas and really, you know, have that longer term planning to really try and impact the most affected areas and the most affected young people by violence. So we are still waiting for that grant allocation as it stands. I know we've all our money's been spent, so we are nearly at the end of the financial year, but still in a bit of limbo as to how that will look for the new financial year. So rather than kind of stopping our activity and then having to restart it again, which we understand leaves vulnerable and young people kind of, you know, further at risk, then what we've managed to do is bridge a lot of those services into the first quarter so they can kind of be picked back up again rather than stopped and started. So what is the Violence Reduction Unit? We're effectively a partnership that aims to reduce violent crime across the West Midlands region. It benefits from expertise of different partners in public health, criminal justice, sports, education, policing, and also academia, all working together to reduce violence. So it really is about that multi-agency approach. So here's some strands of our work. So number one is all about empowering communities and professionals to work together. So really, like I said, about that multi-agency approach, working with children's services, working with police partners, the third sector, you know, local spaces, safe spaces like parks, and really kind of empowering professionals and local people to work together and making people realise that we all have a role to play in reducing the spread of violence. We always say at the VRU, violence is inevitable, but it doesn't mean that it isn't preventable. And it's very much, we take this public health approach to preventing violence, which I'll go into a bit more detail because I'm sure it brings it up on one of the other slides rather than me get too far ahead of myself. So number 2 is embedding good practice through guidance and toolkits. So before we finish today, I will share some links to our website where you can access, for instance, the education toolkit or the strategic needs assessment. So I'll share those bits and pieces with you. On our website as well, we also have location-based activity. So, for instance, if you wanted to see what the VRU are doing specifically in Sandwell, you can click onto the map for Sandwell and it will give you the universal offer and also the local targeted offer to what services are available there. So number 3 is encouraging the use of evidence to make informed decisions. So using our strategic needs assessment, so we do have our own data team that have put that together and update that every year. Really using the evidence that's within that is a lot of useful data on kind of crime stats, exclusion, anything to do with youth violence really. I think what's took a long time for the wider community to understand is the root causes of violence are in deprivation, are within a lack of opportunity, you know, and some of our particular groups in society are probably more affected than others due to those factors. So really using the evidence to where we should be directing not just the money but also the time and the efforts. So we have our strategic needs assessment that was done last year, and we are just, sorry, I've got too far. We are just currently waiting for the new one to be signed off. So I'll share the old one with you, and then as soon as the new one is available, I will get that sent to the group to be distributed as well. It'd be really good for people. I just heard the lady before me speaking about the funding applications. So it's really, you might find some useful information in the strategic needs assessment for particular local areas, you know, and stats around that might help you when putting funding applications together, for instance. So number 4 is about supporting leaders to connect around a shared long-term ambition. So we sit on various violence harm prevention boards across the Midlands. Well, we sit on various different boards and groups across the Midlands around violence and the root causes. But in particular, each area in the Midlands has developed its own strategy now around under 25 violence in particular, and how we can prevent further harm and violence within our communities. And that really is a joint approach from that multi-agency partnership. So depending on where you are in the Midlands, so for instance, Coventry is much further ahead within that strategy than anywhere else. So they developed their strategy, I think they're 5 years into a 10-year strategy, I believe, whereas Walsall, on the other hand, are probably 1 year into that strategy. So it just depends in kind of what area you're looking as to how things are developing and how quickly. And number 5 is commissioning interventions to prevent violence. So really kind of working with the local community safety partnerships to direct where that, not just community safety partnerships, but children's services, the police, schools, anyone that has contact with young people, to see where we need to direct that money for the best kind of impact for that commissioned activity. So our work brings together, as I said, a number of different specialists, so including criminal justice, sport, exploitation, faith, health, education and trauma informed. And we are all about the trauma informed model. And we do have free training available. So we have adverse childhood experiences and trauma informed practice, and also trauma informed for senior leaders. And the theory behind this is the more trauma informed we become as a society, the more that we will understand the root causes of things like violence, and the more we'll be able to have a better response to it. Scotland have used this model very, very successfully. So I'm sure you'll all remember that, 10 or so years ago, Scotland had huge problems, particularly with youth violence and particularly around sharps and knives. Scotland are nowhere near, close to tackling that or even done. However, it took a good 10 years to reflect in their statistics that the model that they use for this trauma-informed to really kind of show impact. But it has done that, and it has worked really successfully. And as a result of it, I think we could learn a lot from Scotland, who are in the race to becoming, I believe, the first trauma-informed country. So some really, really pioneering work happening. So a place-based approach to violence prevention and reduction. We understand that the Midlands is not the same, that each different area has different ethnic minorities, different communities, different challenges. So in order to be successful in preventing and reducing violence, it can't be kind of one model fits all. We've had to really kind of dig deep and do some place-based work, which started with our pilots. So started very small in each area across the Midlands, where we piloted our place-based work on a much smaller scale. So for instance, in Birmingham, the top area that we needed to focus on, that the strategic needs and the data was showing us, was Lascelles, for instance. In Walsall, it was the St Matthews area and town centre. In Coventry, it was Hillfields. And I believe in Dudley it was St James, and in Wolverhampton it has slipped my mind, so my apologies. But I'll talk a bit more about the place-based work as we go throughout the slides a little bit more. So the VRU are all about collaboration, co-production, counter-narrative, community consciousness approach, and cooperation in data intelligence. In data and intelligence sharing. So really looking at that data and that best practice and how we can learn and share that. Collaboration, because the VRU might not be around forever, and we're not here to kind of come into localities and tell people how it's done. The people that work in the local spaces within some of the areas that I've previously mentioned are the great people on the ground, all like yourselves, that are doing the great work day in, day out. So all we want to do is really collaborate with those people, with those right people, and be sat around the right tables to support that work and strengthen that work, which really has to be done in co-production with the community. So really kind of having the community voice heard. And it was really nice to sit on this today and hear about the open spaces for girls. Definitely something I'm a fan of, definitely something we need more of. So for instance, I originally worked over in Birmingham when I started with the VRU, and one of the things that came back from the Spark Hill area in particular was from the parents, was that they didn't feel safe to let their children out in the local park and the local green spaces, which was affecting every element of their life, their mental health, their physical health. And that was like one of the key pieces of feedback. So really, really kind of keen to work with this group, and I've taken down the details for the funding, which I will share with our networks as well, and with our third sector organisations to really encourage them and support them to put in bids for their areas to really kind of strengthen and get people involved in activity and green spaces. So place-based pilots test different approaches to violence prevention and reduction. Everything really is about testing something out, gathering the data, seeing how well it worked. If it works well, then doing more of that. If it doesn't, then maybe readjusting that or changing the focus completely. So responsive to local needs and tailored to an area. So for instance, recently, so I work over in Walsall now. Since Christmas, we've had a real stint of youth violence, particularly around knives and guns, which has been really, really kind of worrying for the community, particularly in the Palfrey and Coldmore area. So what we've done, I mean, there's been a real multifaceted approach to this from all different partners. But we've gone out and we've gone and visited some of the faith organisations in the local area. We've got the HAF fund, which is available, which is the Holiday Activity Fund, which has been secured now across the country for the next 3 years, yet many people still don't know about it. So that means that schools, third sector organisations can all apply in to run holiday activities where they have to provide a meal and positive activity for children and young people. I don't think we've ever seen funding in the West Midlands around a holiday provision like this before, so it's a real great opportunity, but yet so many people don't know about it. So I went out to visit some faith-based organisations to hear their perspective on the recent stint of violence in the community, how they were feeling about it, how their communities were feeling about it, what solutions that they saw, and to really try and build capacity within the local area. So, you know, to tell them things like about the HAF fund and how they can access it, how they can access, for instance, these green spaces funds. So really trying to, like I said, build capacity kind of within. One of the other things that the VRU does is we take this whole system approach, and by doing that, you know, I think it's the most effective way of doing something. So, for instance, if we deliver training into a school, rather than just delivering it to the safeguarding team, we want that whole school approach. We want that buy-in right from the top of the head all the way down to, you know, the receptionist, the security guard, because every interaction with a young person or a vulnerable person is an opportunity for intervention. And if all they've ever seen is what we call kind of shark infested waters, so adults that can't be trusted, then all they're going to do in their vision of the world is see every adult as a shark. So every opportunity to say good morning or hello, to give a positive experience, can really make the difference. And that's what we want to do, is we just want to really equip people with the tools and the skills to best support our communities. And then, as I said there, it's about being, you know, providing that evidence to be able to scale up these approaches or adopt new ways of working, or learning from different parts of the country or even the world, to see what's worked well and take on maybe some of those models of working. And, you know, and making sure that all of that is quite innovative and is different to what we've seen before. So this just gives you a bit of a summary, there we go, of the pilots, and it doesn't have Wolverhampton down as the area. So as I said, Hillfields, Coventry, Lascelles in Birmingham. Then we grew from Lascelles to 3 Estates, which is Kings Norton area of Birmingham, which is quite close to me. I went to school there. St Matthews, Walsall and Wolverhampton. Again, somebody's missed that off. So growing from 2019 to 2020, where we're at now, we now have 9 pilots across the different local authorities. It says 2 in Birmingham, but this hasn't been updated. I believe there's probably more than 9 now, because I think we have 4 in Birmingham now, for instance. Oh, sorry, I've gone too far. There we go. So structure. The structure of the VRU, I do have another presentation which kind of goes a lot more in depth into the structure and everything, so I can share that if it's of interest. And it just shows who we're accountable to, which groups that we're a part of, which stakeholder networks we're a part of, which meetings that we sit in, and really kind of how you can be a part of that. So each area in the Midlands has its own stakeholder group, which is around under 25 violence is the theme. But like I said, if we look at the root causes of violence, then we know we can't just sit in a room for an hour and discuss the violent incidents that are happening. That's putting fires out, and where we want to be is obviously we need to respond to serious incidents when they occur. But where we want to be is really in that preventative piece of work. So as I mentioned earlier about the public health model, the best example of me giving you for the public health approach is COVID. So we all knew that in order to stop the spread of COVID, we all had a role to play. And we see violence exactly the same. So we all knew that we had a responsibility to wear our face masks, to social distance, and at certain points, even to, you know, be bound to our houses in lockdown. And we knew we had to do that to stop the spread. And if we could take the same approach to violence, then look how quickly we came out of the pandemic. Then hopefully we can come out of where we're at, which is really, really kind of serious times for our young people and quite scary. Then hopefully we can come out of it a lot sooner if we can all play our role within that and understand what our role is. Another example of a public health approach, a really, really successful example, would be the fire service. So when I was growing up, I used to see them out physically putting out fires all the time on a regular basis. I don't actually remember the last time I saw a fire brigade out putting out a fire, and that's because they've spent 10+ years really working on the education piece and that preventative piece of work, which has been successful. So now they spend a lot of their time going into the community and houses in how to prevent fires and providing equipment and education around that. So we're like the fire service for violence with the public health approach, so to speak. So exploring gaps in partnership, asset mapping, these are all parts of our role that we do. So like I was saying, if you want to get involved in the stakeholder network, or you just even out of interest want to just pop along for one meeting, then I'd really, really be keen to have any of you there. So I will share my email with you, and then depending on what locality you are, I shall be able to point you in the right direction to get you the right invite for that. So I think this is my last slide, and I wasn't quite sure how long I had, so I hope I haven't gone over. So this is our delivery model of working. You can see here at the top we've got our response. So after serious violent incidents occur, we would be there to support communities in the aftermath of that. So as I'm sure you can all remember, the tragic murder that took place, that was really, really high profile of a young person not too long ago in Birmingham. We was able to very quickly go into that area with what we call MVP, which is one of our training programs, Mentors in Violence Prevention. We was able to go into some of the local schools and use that model to kind of get a feel for how the young people was feeling about the incident, about their own safety, about their own future, about what they wanted to do in memory of the young man that lost his life. And there was lots of great pieces of work that took place during the aftermath of that. We also sit around the table, so when the police call like their meetings after a serious incident has occurred, we do have a seat around the table, so we're able to advocate for young people. You know, many of our systems are geared up to sanction young people rather than understand them and understand why they do things. So we are here to advocate that voice for our young people, to see them as children first rather than perpetrators first, and to really get them the support that they need. And if we know that we are tackling violence at the level 1, so where we first see any kind of signs of behaviour, that might just be you know, bad language or you know, a bit of truancy. If we tackle it then, we've got half a chance, rather than allowing it to go to the level 2, which would be you know, maybe spitting or you know, that behaviour, throwing a chair across the classroom. Then that's when we begin to intervene. But normally when our interventions occur at level 2, it's normally a sanction. And then at level 3, it's too late for us to help, because that's where they are involved. They've committed a serious incident or been a victim of a serious incident and are now part of the criminal justice system. So we really need to be tackling it at that level 1. So like I said, if we can do that and advocate for our young people, that they are children first. So some of the things that we've done in response after the wake of serious violence is we've put detached youth workers out into the community to help you know, people feel a bit safer and be able to have those positive conversations with somebody. We've got therapeutic support and counselling and mentoring for victims and families that have been affected. And those are just a couple of examples of the work that we have done and can do. In terms of the targeted approach, this is more intensive support, so to that local place-based working, establishing local violence reduction networks, so the stakeholder groups, supporting community co-production. So, you know, when I went out to those faith organisations to hear what they need and how we can support them, and coordinated primary, secondary and tertiary interventions. So depending on what level it's needed, we will support all the way up. And the universal offer, which is for everybody, which is all about empowering communities to play their role in violence prevention, developing that strong counter narrative to violence, and training, guidance and education, you know, around the trauma informed practice. So I hope that was a real quick whistle stop tour, and I kind of spoke at you for the last 15 minutes, but if anyone's got any questions, then they're happy to answer.
Thanks, Erica. That was great. So, any questions? Put up your hand.
A lot to digest.
Well, it's certainly given me food for thought.
I was going to say, if anyone's just got any general ideas, general concerns about your areas, your parks, then please don't hesitate to get in contact, and let's see what we can do and how we can work together and how we can support the work that you're doing in some form of way. So we'll pop my email in the chat, and I will share those links as well to the website.
You're on mute, Alison.
When I spoke to Nikki about the presentation today, there was discussion about whether some training might be appropriate for some of the our Midlands members. In parks, they've lost a lot of rangers and all that engagement stuff that used to go on. So I was wondering how that might work, really, whether there was any potential for that.
Yeah, absolutely. We could happily deliver the training to anyone that wants it. Like I said, the more people, as far as I'm concerned, that are trained in this and just generally have an understanding, even for yourself and the people you come into contact in your own communities, then the more that it strengthens, you know, our communities and our societies. So I can help coordinate that. That can be face to face or online at times to suit. So if you need evening or something, then I can be flexible.
Okay, thank you.
You're very welcome. And I agree, you know, with the park rangers and all the cutbacks, you know, in everything, we're 10+ years into austerity, aren't we? So we really do need to be figuring out ways to how we can get that engagement back with our young people.
Yeah, I was going to ask that question about youth services. I mean, we've seen youth services sort of take a bit of a nosedive over the last 10 years and you know, not having that interaction with young people as much as we used to through the local authorities. Definitely there's still sort of community-based youth services going on, and there's still you know, the peripatetic youth service, which, you know, you've tried to maintain, but it's been difficult for all of us really to sort of weather the storms, hasn't it? And I guess as a result we will see this sort of lack of engagement with young people.
And I think we're paying the price of it, aren't we? You know, seeing those rises in youth violence, and especially with COVID and mental health and everything else on the rise, I think we're far out of the water. I do think things are going to get much worse before they can get better.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's about being realistic with that. But it's promising because there's a lot of investment coming into the Midlands. So, you know, through the youth fund and through the HAF fund. So it's promising over the next couple of years with what we can potentially do as a partnership together.
Yeah. Yeah, and we're certainly sort of taking advantage of the HAF money at the moment to deliver our sort of, you know, green spaces programs, and that's working really well. So that's for the next 3 years, I believe. So fingers crossed we can still deliver all of that stuff. So yeah, we'll definitely take you up on the.
I was going to say I was on fundraiser in a different life, and I actually still help a few organisations, not in the Midlands because of the conflict of interest, but up north in Blackburn and Darwin. And I've actually been working on a project with green safe spaces, which has been really, really interesting. So it's something I'm really, really in support of.
Lovely. And we've certainly been seeing quite a lot of change within Palfrey, which you talked about in Walsall, around the work we did. We spent a lot of money. It was lottery money back in the day at Palfrey Park, and the changes there are just phenomenal.
Oh, it shows. I was down at the Seed Hut a couple of weeks ago, and you can really see that how it has added benefit to the park, definitely. And the safety, they was telling me just even the entrance and the changes that had been made there had changed the whole park completely.
Yeah, I'd like to do the same thing at Pleck Park, which is right close to the M6 sort of flyover thing, and that definitely needs a huge amount of investment, but that's for another day.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, Erica. So our next bit was the round table discussions. We've lost quite a few people. There's only 16 of us left in the room, but Nicola, would you like to tell us a little bit about your first, because your name is Alan? Would you like to tell us a bit about what's happening in Telford at the moment?
Yeah, main project is that we're updating on out tender for the strategic framework for the town park. That's the big one, and also we're replacing the toddler play area in the autumn within the park. Short and sweet.
Brilliant, short and sweet. Chris, no longer at rugby.
Sorry, I thought you were alphabetical. I thought W would be last.
No, you're just off my list as W. It must be the Chris, because you're starting with a C.
Got me on the hop there.
Sorry.
I'll keep it short and sweet for South Derbyshire. We're just doing going out for tender for a new play area at Newell Park, which is near Swadlincote. Just submitted all our green flags for this year, so there's 3 green flag applications gone in. And one that I'm aware of, and it is specific to the East Midlands, so I apologise for those colleagues across in the West Midlands. If you are under the flight path of East Midlands Airport and happen to watch the starring role yesterday on East Midlands today, they have launched the Eco Gardens competition for eco schools, or any schools basically, in the catchment area of Leicestershire, Derbyshire and Nottinghamshire under the flight path. East Midlands Airport have got £120,000 to give out for the schools to connect young people with nature and green space, which I've got myself involved into, clearly. I'm one of the judges, and my educational team manager is also one of the judges as well. So we're supporting the airport in terms of giving money out to school gardens, basically, and connecting young people with nature, which is perfect. And that's what I do all the time, isn't it? Why wouldn't I be a head judge for that? So yes, specific Derbyshire, Leicestershire, Nottinghamshire connection there. But definitely one that if anyone's got any contacts in the schools, and we are looking for young people to design the gardens themselves. You know, we really want young people to engage with this and around climate change and stuff like that. So short and sweet for me. I think the other thing really is Rochester Forestry Centre we are looking at the moment in terms of how we move that forward. It's been stagnant for a few years, so one of my remits is looking at that and moving that forward, which is great, Chris. But National Forest, one other thing actually, talking of National Forest, we are aware that Forestry England are changing their rules, and it's one for a future discussion. I meant to email Alison around felling licenses on public open spaces. At the moment, if you manage public open spaces, they're exempt from felling licenses being needed for Forestry England. They are reviewing that process. So even if you're an urban park with some trees on, in the future, you might need a felling license to do any tree work. Bizarre as that is, I have a contact at Forestry England, which I'll email around to Alison and you, Liz, to get them to come and talk to us, because we could all fall foul without even knowing it.
Yeah.
So it's one I've picked up at because the National Forest connection I've now got. And if Yvonne's on the call, she'll know exactly why I've now got involved in that. But yeah, one to watch out for people.
Great.
Cheers.
So next on my list is Colin from Rugby.
Rugby. Oh.
Hi everyone. Yeah. Is that working?
Yeah, can hear you,
Yep.
Colin.
Yeah, I guess a few things. We've recently advertised to replace a certain Mr. Chris Warman. Unfortunately, we'll be going back out to advert again. So we'll email that through to Alison to advertise when that goes live. I guess in terms of our other projects, doing a bit of work in Whitehall Recreation Ground, refurbishing our bandstand. We'll be out to start doing some pathway works there at some of our other sites as well. Fremantle and Cornwallis, basically improving our pedestrian and cycle paths to make them shared use as what we call our Park Connector Network projects that we've got going. I think those are the most parts really, just a bit of chasing our tails currently with the workload and things. So, but yeah, we'll share the link for when that advert goes live again.
You're a man down by the sound of things.
Indeed, yes, making challenging with the workload, shall we say? But yeah, we'll keep going, and yeah.